This year's biggest sports anime may just be the hit football anime Blue Lock. It takes the classic morals of popular sports series and turns them upside down. We've already made a video dedicated to Blue Lock itself. Today, we're going to be comparing and contrasting Blue Lock with two legendary sports anime of the 2010s, Haikyu and Kuroko No Basket. After all, you can't appreciate what we have now without looking at what came before. Heck, sports anime as we know it may not have been even the same without the major early sports series like Attack No. 1 or Tomorrow's Joe. We'll be dividing this video up into three major points we'd like to compare: characters, setting, and style. So let's start with that first point, shall we? Characters. One thing that really sets Blue Lock apart from the other two shows we're talking about is that it has a singular protagonist. Kuroko No Basket and even Haikyuu have two major characters at the center of the series. Of course, considering Blue Lock's focus on individuality over teamwork, this makes sense. And like we said in our last video, Blue Lock's protagonist, Yoichi Isagi, is the ultimate representation of Blue Lock's philosophy. While others were hesitant to participate at first, Isagi had shown desire to be a football star on his own, even before he was chosen for the Blue Lock program. He basically is the polar opposite of Haikyuu's protagonist, Shoyo Hinata. While Isagi is quiet, cold, and focused on victory, Hinata is more good-natured and friendly, while still remaining competitive, just less so than Isagi. Hinata's character is pretty clearly inspired by another famous volleyball anime protagonist, that being Yu Hazuki from the popular 80s sports series Attacker Yu. Like Hinata, Yu is both a competitive but positive young woman, and the two of them both have the same short ginger hair. Hinata's rival turned teammate Kageyama is even similar to Yu's former rival Nami. Speaking of Kageyama, in a lot of ways he's co-protagonist with Hinata. He acts as a perfect foil to Hinata's optimistic personality with his less positive and sometimes more selfish attitude. Really, Kageyama has a bit more in common with Isagi, although definitely not to the extremes Isagi goes. He can still be a team player when it counts. Kuroko No Basket's two main protagonists also worked as foils to each other. The first is the titular Tetsuya Kuroko. He differs from the usual outgoing sports protagonists with his more reserved personality. In fact, he's so quiet that people literally don't notice him unless he speaks up, even if he's right in front of them. His name Kuroko actually has a deeper meaning connected to his invisibility. In Japanese kabuki theater, there are stagehands dressed in all black known as Kuroko. The audience is supposed to treat the Kuroko like they aren't there, hence Kuroko's name. Of course, his quiet personality is offset by his teammate and fellow protagonist, Taiga Kagami. Kagami is more hot-headed and competitive, which pretty much makes him the polar opposite of Kuroko. Like with Hinata, Kagami is also pretty clearly inspired by another famous sports anime protagonist. In this case, it's Hanamichi Sakuragi from the classic Slam Dunk. Both of them have similar brash and highly driven personalities. It makes sense. Slam Dunk was a big deal back in the 90s, and a lot of anime that came after took inspiration from it, especially basketball anime. Some have even called Kuroko No Basket a spiritual successor to Slam Dunk, and it lives up to that in a lot of ways. Overall, Haikyuu is the anime with the most typical protagonist. A lot of anime have bright, optimistic protagonists like Hinata, and it works well. Kagami and Kuroko both work off of each other great, and are part of what makes the series so much fun. And meanwhile, Isagi's serious attitude fits Blue Lock's philosophy perfectly. Now let's move on to setting. This section will probably be the shortest, but it's just as important as the other two. For Haikyuu and Kuroko, the setting is a fairly standard one for an anime. They both take place in a modern Japanese high school. Lots of anime and manga take place in settings like this one, especially ones targeted at teenagers. And of course, since there are sports anime, a lot of the action takes place on the court. Blue Lock is one that's most different in terms of setting. It takes place in the titular Blue Lock, an experimental facility where Isagi and 299 other boys are meant to train to become the ultimate striker. Like we mentioned in our previous Blue Lock video, the series takes a lot of inspiration from the death game genre of horror. Series like Squid Game and Battle Royale, where people are put in a small area and forced into life or death situations. Obviously, in Blue Lock, nobody actually dies, but the inspiration is clear. This setting of the Blue Lock facility is a major strength and a bit of a weakness. The setting of Blue Lock gives it a unique quality that fits the time of the series. It's got the same stern attitude that the Jinpachi ego preaches. However, the main disadvantage of the setting is that we don't see much of the world outside of the facility. Really, there aren't even many moments for the Blue Lock boys to just unwind and be themselves. In the scenes that aren't them playing football, it's mostly them discussing what to do next in the game. While high school is more of an overused setting, it does give Haikyu and Kuroko some advantages. We get to see more casual downtime with the characters in both these shows, since for them, it's not all sports all the time, even if they are competitive. For example, one early episode of Kuroko No Basket dictates the first quarter of the episode to the Seirin Basketball Club's attempts at buying sandwiches during a lunch rush. These slice-of-life segments, while not the main focus, are still important. They act as a bit of a fun comic relief between each major match and help characterize everyone. Of course, even if Haikyu and Kuroko No Basket have the same setting, they are still setting themselves apart in other ways, such as style. This is where the three anime differ the most. We touched on this briefly in the Blue Lock video, but sports anime can range from fairly realistic to incredibly over the top. An example of a realistic sports anime would be Yuri on Ice, where the animators put lots of effort into animating the figure skating scenes. Meanwhile, an example of a sports anime that cares less about realism and accuracy is Basquash, which is about giant robots playing basketball. The most hyper-stylized out of these three shows is without a doubt Kuroko No Basket. The basketball matches in this are insane, looking like something out of a shonen battle series like Dragon Ball or Bleach. Of course, unlike the aforementioned Basquash, what you need to remember about Kuroko is that none of the stuff you see is literally happening. It's really just an extreme visual metaphor for the benefit of the audience. What this series does is takes plausible basketball moves and makes them more flashy and fun. Even some of the more unbelievable aspects of the show aren't that far off from the truth. For example, the character Midorima has some ridiculous shooting range and is able to score shots from across the court. For most basketball players, that's pretty much impossible to do consistently, but real-life players like Steph Curry are about to pull off some insane shots. Blue Lock has certainly taken a lot of cues from Kuroko when it comes to how it portrays its football matches. It's not quite as over the top, but they're still stylized in their own way. It sort of finds a balance between stylized and realistic. While there are still lots of crazy, improbable feats and the characters with glowing eyes, it still reels itself back in. In Kuroko, the characters almost feel superhuman a lot of the time. But in Blue Lock, the animation really makes it look like the characters are straining their bodies to pull off these shots. And of course, between these three anime, Haikyuu is the one that grounds things the closest to reality. The action you see isn't that different from a typical sports drama. However, Haikyuu still takes advantage of its animated form quite well. In a live-action sports drama, you're a bit limited by what is and isn't possible in reality. But with animation, you can show pretty much everything you want, which is why Blue Lock and Kuroko No Basket add so much deliberate stylization. While Haikyu holds back on this to create a more grounded atmosphere, it still has a stylization of its own. It has a lot of shots and camera angles that would be almost impossible to get in a live-action sports story. So even if that's the most realistic of the three, it still has its own unique style. So what did we learn here? All three of these shows are held in high regard, but are each different in their own way, from their inspiration to how they present themselves. We've really only just scratched the surface today. We absolutely recommend you watch these for yourself if you haven't already. Believe us, you will not regret it. Which of these shows is your personal favorite?